The world has changed much over the past 9 decades. What was once just a subculture in America's educational system and a practical way to learn for unseen millions studying in the privacy of their homes, correspondence or home study education, and more recently, technology-based distance learning is now widely accepted and respected by even the most traditional educators. A form of education once dismissed as matchbox schooling has become the fastest growing segment of higher education today, with online student enrollments increasing at a rate of over 15% a year. In this presentation, you will see a story unfold of a form of learning for the masses once called schools for a second chance, schools that were able to attract over 140 million people to their collective rolls. Distance education has become the norm for thousands of higher learning institutions and the preferred medium for millions of learners to study today. The mediums used to educate at a distance now include laptops, personal computers, electronic books, thumb drives, streaming video, web conferencing, and other developing media that was unimaginable just 20 years ago. And this is only the beginning of the exciting, unpredictable revolution taking place. This is how people will acquire knowledge and skills in the future. The National Home Study Council, the NHSC, was founded in 1926 by a handful of visionary educators. The council was founded first on a desire to provide better educational services to their students, second, to have standards of excellence for schools to meet, and third, to avoid federal regulation. To address these goals, a group of forward-thinking correspondence school leaders began to meet, to plan, and to develop strategies. These distance education leaders would eventually form the association that is now known around the world as the Distance Education and Training Council, the DETC. This documentary will explore the causes, factors, and the social pressures that led to the establishment of the DETC. We will see a collection of historic photographs of the hundreds of men and women of the Council who educated the working classes of America, who helped train the nation's workforce to see it through war and peace, depression and boom times, recessions and recoveries. Correspondence study was a key driver in propelling the country forward towards prosperity and a leadership role on the world stage. Consider that from 1890 until World War II, correspondence schools enrolled more people, an estimated total of 60 million, than all other forms of post-secondary education combined. Join us now as we explore the greatest success story in education and training in the world. Let's look at the American way to learn. The transition from the 19th to the 20th century saw vast changes in the world and even more accelerating changes in the United States. In the years before the war to end all wars, we witnessed millions of immigrants coming to our shores, yearning to be free and hungering to pursue their dreams. Our music, cuisine, established religions, industries, and in fact, our entire culture was rapidly evolving. Manufacturing and industry required trained, skilled workers. The insatiable demand for workers created opportunities for both reputable and unethical schools to operate. Education was seen by many as the way out of the inner cities where the new immigrants lived and toward the full promise of what this country could offer. It was into this challenging 20th century world that the future National Home Study Council would be created. President Theodore Roosevelt, the explorer and war hero, would change the way that the nation thought about itself. President Roosevelt once said, "I look upon instruction by mail as one of the wonders of the age." Events such as the St. Louis World's Fair brought people together from around the nation and from around the world. Electricity, first used at the St. Louis World's Fair, would radically change our way of life, while at the same time in New York City, the new subway opened with its first section between City Hall and West 145th Street. In 1903, the first powered flight by the Wright brothers took place at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. The marvels of technological change were upon us. At the beginning of the 20th century, the nation's transportation system relied exclusively on railroads. All railroad lines led to the great city of Chicago, the city of big shoulders. Because of this, the mail-order houses of the day, Sears, Alden's, Montgomery Ward, Spiegel's, and dozens of other mail-order companies located their headquarters in the Windy City to take advantage of the excellent transportation hub and the burgeoning U.S. postal system running on the rails. Naturally, the mail-order schools also flocked to Chicago. At one point before World War II, there were 40 correspondence schools located within the city. These institutions became household names like American School, LaSalle Extension University, Institute of Applied Science, International Accountants Society, Industrial Training Institute, and the Stock Market Institute. At this same time, there was a new sense of government protectionism, given impetus from trustbusters such as Teddy Roosevelt and the muckraking journalist Upton Sinclair, and novelists such as Sinclair Lewis. The Pure Food and Drug Law was passed in 1906 to protect the populace from medical quackery. Other laws and regulations were passed to protect people from dishonest companies and products. This consumer protection movement led to the founding of the NHSC in 1926. The influx of immigrants and men and women leaving the farms for the cities created opportunities for learning. This was a time when completing grade school was still rare and reading and writing English were beyond the reach of millions in this country. There were no real opportunities to go to school for these millions. There were no community colleges, and trade schooling was only available to those living in the larger cities. But even more changes would come with the war to end all wars. The Great War, World War I, resulted in over 50 million deaths. But it also placed heavy demands on citizens of this country to support the war effort and brought about new opportunities for American doughboys to learn about other cultures and people. The concept of 2 million Americans in uniform going over there led to what writer and salon wit Gertrude Stein coined the lost generation. A generation of young people. These second-generation immigrants were filled with wonder and a thirst for learning and an insatiable curiosity about how others lived. The doughboys were no longer satisfied to live in blissful ignorance on the family farm. They began to see better possibilities for themselves, gained often by means of correspondence study as a way to a better life. A popular lyric of the day asked, "How are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris?" One of the most famous Americans of his generation and one of the most decorated heroes of the war, a pilot who shot down 26 German aircraft and won the Congressional Medal of Honor, was Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. He later became president of Eastern Airlines. His alma mater was the International Correspondence Schools, a founding member of the NHSC. The armistice of 1918 would bring many more challenges and opportunities to the nation and would cause correspondence study to grow even more rapidly. Distance education in the United States can trace its history back to 1873, when the Society to Encourage Studies at Home was founded in Boston by Anna E. Ticknor, the wife of a Harvard professor. Mrs. Ticknor's goal in starting this correspondence school was to introduce among ladies the habit of devoting some part of every day to the study of a systematic and thorough kind. Later in 1891, the University of Chicago, the homeland of distance education under its president, William Rainey Harper, launched Bible correspondence degree programs. Several great land-grant universities, such as the University of Wisconsin, also started correspondence study departments. Harper extolled the powers of the method and became the father of correspondence education. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, several private correspondence schools were launched. Many of these schools would form the nucleus around which the future NHSC would be formed. A number of these schools are still in existence today. Correspondence learning was then, as online learning is now, viewed as a convenient and affordable way to improve one's life through self-help and hard work. This trait is just as American as hot dogs and apple pie. A hearty streak of the Horatio Alger myth. The timeless American story of going from rags to riches was part of the DNA of the study-at-home movement. It said to people, you can be better than you are through training and education. You can take charge of your future. One typical magazine ad of the early 20th century was an employer sitting behind a vast desk with the caption, "Send me a trained man." For almost a century, high school and skill-imparting vocational courses were the predominant programs offered by the nation's correspondence education schools. After all, this is what the public demanded, and the schools offered what the public wanted. The nation's longing for new technology and its new obsession with making money and acquiring things accelerated with the end of the First World War. The automobile, airplane, radio, and other technology increased the demand for trained professionals to build and service material goods. Correspondence schools moved quickly to fill the demand as the explosion in global commerce created openings for managers, supervisors, accountants, clerks, lawyers, and salespeople. The NHSC schools offered practice-based, self-paced, and well-illustrated independent learning programs in business, law, bookkeeping, and supervision. In fact, schools offered courses in any field you can name in the world of commerce or manufacturing. Technical home study courses were also popular. Programs were offered in blueprint design, radio repair, fingerprint identification, automotive engine repair, and even how to read a stock market ticker tape. Schools also modernized. In a world of print, it was advantageous for schools to produce current and new products quickly. Larger schools, such as International Correspondence Schools and LaSalle Extension University, rapidly adopted new methods of typesetting, printing, and mailing of courses. They owned warehouses the size of many football fields, stacked to the rafters with specially written booklets. Hundreds of people were involved in the preparation, production, and grading of courses in these schools. Correspondence study had become popular and part of the American culture. The Roaring Twenties would be a critical decade for correspondence education and for the nation. Industrialization was booming, while manned flight was already in its second decade. The flappers were dancing, jazz was playing, and bread sold for 12 cents a loaf in 1920. The Scott Fitzgeralds were lighting up Riviera beaches. Hemingway was off in Spain chasing crazed bulls in Pamplona and wild trout on the Irati River. But on the horizon, there were signs of trouble to come. Many people were speculating in the stock market, and buying stock shares on the margin was popular. Families were living above their means on credit they could not repay. The federal government was regulating many aspects of the economy. Correspondence education came under scrutiny for the poor record some unprincipled operators had in delivering on their promises. Dr. John S. Nofsinger, a brilliant young researcher with the Carnegie Corporation, had a grant to investigate the correspondence study field. His research led to a seminal book in 1924, Correspondence Schools, Lyceums, and Chautauquas. The impact of his book on how people in power viewed correspondence study cannot be overstated. As Nofsinger wrote, many of them, the schools, are in the shady zone, bordering on the criminal. He favored tough federal and state regulation and supervision of correspondence schools. As a visitor to our shores from France, Alexis de Tocquevilliers observed in his 1835 classic treatise on American society, Democracy in America, Americans love to form societies and associations to advance a common cause. When in doubt, start an association. That is exactly what the founding fathers of the NHSC did. Nofsinger urged the ethical schools to purge their profession of the unethical and criminal schools and encouraged the ethical schools to take action of self-regulation before the federal government did it for them. These unethical operations were commonly called fly-by-night schools by the news media, and their existence was a sorry blight on the national psyche. The zealous urging to action from Nofsinger, coupled with the real threat of federal intervention, brought together 13 major correspondence school leaders, including Nofsinger, to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City on September 27, 1926. Their plan was to set up an association to separate themselves from the fly-by-night schools. At this meeting, the school owners budgeted in $15,000 for the first year to form a new association to be headquartered in the nation's capital. Their goals were to set certain good practices that schools would have to accept before they could become members of the new National Home Study Council. These goals were perfected and expanded when the new council was officially founded a month later. 13 founders met again on October 29, 1926, to adopt bylaws and to elect the first president, Ralph E. Weeks, of the International Correspondence Schools. They established permanent committees on research, membership, and most importantly, on ethical standards and business standards. The new association understood the urgency in developing a self-regulating organization that would provide the public and potential students with a standard by which they could measure quality and identify ethical schools. The founders selected Dr. John S. Nofsinger as the first executive director of the new council, and a new association was formed. Now the question was, could it convince the owners of all the correspondence schools of the era to regulate themselves? Only time would tell. In 1927, at its first annual meeting at the Casey Hotel in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the new council attracted 40 attendees. These included representatives from the Federal Trade Commission and the U.S. Civil Service. Together, these leaders in the industry discussed the possible rules governing correspondence schools. A young New York City advertising executive, Alvin Kaplan, representing the world-famous Lewis Hotel Schools of Washington, D.C., was present at this first meeting. He would later remark in 1972 to DETC staff member Michael Lambert that everyone at the first meeting was in deadly earnest. This was a serious group of businessmen, nearly all of them considered to be pillars of their respective communities, the cream of their local hometown society, members of elite social clubs like the Union League Club in Chicago. They were truly captains of industry. They wore large suits with vests, drank large drinks, and talked big business, and the cigar smoke in those meeting rooms would have choked a horse. This discussion would later lead to the Federal Trade Commission issuing its Fair Trade Practices Rule, dealing with correspondence schools, a ruling that coincided with what the NHSC attempted to do by voluntary self-regulation. This rule actually helped to strengthen the association's aim of eliminating corrupt schools and safeguarding the rights of students to obtain the education that they were promised. This self-regulation continues today and is enforced by the Accrediting Commission of the DETC. The Great Depression of the 1930s saw many correspondence schools go out of business. People had little discretionary income for school tuition. Unemployment was rampant. But NHSC school leaders recognized that training was one hope for people, and schools lowered their tuition and offered generous payment plans. Many of the schools were not only able to survive, but to prosper. Between 1929 and 1934, International Correspondence Schools, or ICS, earned $18.5 million. While this may not sound like much, in today's dollars, this would be the equivalent of $261 million. It is obvious even today that ICS and other schools still in existence to this day understood the market, provided the education needed for the time, and kept their prices affordable while delivering on their promises. Correspondence education grew even during the Depression. The Cleveland Institute of Electronics began in 1934, and the National Baking School was founded in 1936. Both schools taught trades that students wanted and that provided ways out of poverty and unemployment. They helped men earn a paycheck for their families. Learning a trade then, as now, continues to be a way towards financial success. Correspondence schools were by now a familiar part of the American experience. One of the most famous advertisements in history was an ad for the U.S. School of Music, an NHSC member. It became a standard quote used by politicians from Harry Truman to Richard Nixon to Ronald Reagan. They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play. Another popular advertising campaign was the Art Instruction School's innovative Draw Me ads, which attracted students with a talent test. During the Depression, the NHSC also did its part to reduce unemployment. The council monitored the employment of salesmen at member and non-member schools alike, reporting to the federal government on its efforts to keep as many men as possible employed and out of the breadlines. Correspondence schooling was a lifeline for millions of Americans, especially for those in rural states. It was said before World War II that over 1/2 of the lawyers and accountants west of the Mississippi received their training from a correspondence school. So too did many of the nation's business leaders, the most notable being Walter P. Chrysler, founder of the Chrysler Corporation. Many individuals from all walks of life, from average people to politicians, enrolled in correspondence schools to better themselves. One of these average people was a man interested in radio. Arthur Godfrey first learned radio at the U.S. Naval Radio School in 1921 and furthered his radio knowledge by taking courses from the International Correspondence School. He would go on to become an announcer for NBC in Baltimore and then move on to CBS Radio in the 1940s. He eventually hosted 3 different radio and television programs from the late 1940s to the 1960s and starred in a variety of films including 4 for Texas in 1963 and The Glass Bottom Boat in 1966. Members of the performing arts elite also enrolled in correspondence school courses. Dancer and choreographer Agnes DeMille, daughter of William DeMille, the successful playwright, studied at the Henry George School of Social Science, an NHSC member school. Famous as a choreographer and the founder of the Agnes DeMille Heritage Dance Theater, she received the Handel Medallion, New York's highest award for achievement in the arts.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
As the nation went to war, so did the school members of the NHSC. Leaders such as H.T. Held, president of the Illinois Institute of Technology, challenged members at the 1942 annual conference to provide men and women what they needed to win the war. At this same time, Dr. Nofsinger said that what their members could do is to contribute to the winning of this war. By 1944, American prisoners of war were permitted to enroll in correspondence courses. The War Prisoners' Aid of the YMCA permitted the distribution of materials to prisoner of war camps in Europe and Japan. Records of their work were sent through Geneva to the U.S. so the servicemen would have certified records of their academic work after the war. The NHSC schools provided not only men and women for the war effort, but also provided vital training to those who stayed at home to produce the materials needed for the war. The United States Armed Forces Institute, USAFI, in Madison, Wisconsin, administered and distributed hundreds of thousands of correspondence courses that were provided in part by NHSC members. The military also recognized the value of distance learning early in the war. The Marine Corps Institute, founded in 1920 with the generous help of international correspondence schools, was a pioneer in the use of correspondence education for military training. Now, all branches of the military use distance and distributed education as the core of all their training efforts. The 1944 Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or what is commonly known as the GI Bill, transformed higher education from an experience for just the privileged to an American right. The GI Bill, signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on June 22, 1944, would open the doors to colleges and schools as nothing ever had before. American education was to be truly accessible to the average citizen. Millions of GIs came back home to rebuild their lives. One infantryman who lived through the fighting in France was internationally famous artist Charles Schulz, creator of the immortal cartoon strip Peanuts. Schulz honed his artistic skills with art instruction schools before going to war and came back home to teach there. NHSC schools were ready to do their part for the returning GIs. The number of former servicemen and women taking correspondence education grew over the next decades. Even now, many DETC schools offer special or customized programs for active and retired servicemen and women. Post-World War II found the establishment of new and colorful NHSC schools. Again, this was a direct result of the demand from the marketplace. Career education programs, along with vocational education, were the norm. The famous Artists' School and its affiliate, the famous Writers' School, were soon to become household names. These specialty schools had impressive consultants. People like renowned illustrator Norman Rockwell, science fiction icon Rod Serling, and writer and publisher Bennett Cerf. These consultants did not teach, but rather oversaw the development of richly detailed study courses and also provided, through the use of their names and images, the guiding faculty. This was the motivation needed for thousands of dreaming students studying in farmhouse kitchens, foxholes, on commuter trains, and in lunchrooms around the nation. The schools of the 1950s offered instruction in business, as they long had, but also in trades and crafts, millinery, dress design, landscaping, locksmithing, gun repair, and even TV repair from DeForest's training school. The demand for convenient, at-home learning was stronger than ever. A new method of verifying the value of correspondence education would arise during the 1950s and would lead to accreditation as we know it. The 1950s brought other challenges to the NHSC and its member schools. Government regulation by the Federal Trade Commission was again possible, and the NHSC leaders took action to strengthen their own self-regulation. The council leaders knew that full acceptance by the traditional academic world was unlikely. They believed that the best way to achieve national acceptance would be by receiving recognition of some kind from the federal government. The young NHSC legal counsel of that era, Bernard Ehrlich, worked with the Congress to have language inserted into the Korean War GI Bill. This required the U.S. Commissioner of Education to publish a list of reliable agencies as to the quality of education and training. Mr. Ehrlich served as the NHSC legal counsel from 1949 to 1987. This is a noteworthy 38-year career of helping the students of member schools become eligible for almost every federal student assistance program. After months of planning, the Council voted in March of 1955 to establish an independent and freestanding Accreditation Commission. This commission, along with the selection of the first commissioners, set the stage for enforcement of tougher rules to protect students and the public from any unethical member schools. William Bethke, vice president from LaSalle Extension University, became the first Accrediting Commission chairman, with the first accrediting visit taking place in November 1955 at the Institute of Applied Science. The NHSC was able to attract as public commission members the leading academics of the day, including 3 former U.S. Commissioners of Education. One of them, Dr. Lawrence G. Derthick Jr., was the nation's longest-serving U.S. Commissioner of Education. As the U.S. Commissioner of Education, Dr. Derthick signed a letter in 1959 granting formal federal recognition to the NHSC, a historic moment in the Council's history. Others serving as commissioners were Harold C. Hunt, a former Undersecretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and John Phillips, a former Deputy Secretary for Post-Secondary Education. Over the years, the formation of an independent accrediting commission would move self-regulation to new heights in distance education. The independent commissioners would pass periodic judgment on each member school and represent the public and students to various accredited schools. DETC's accreditation program was formed as a viable way to prove the worth of distance education and to protect students. The next several decades would test this goal. The decade of the 1960s found a rapid growth in the distance education movement. More new schools formed and a new group of corporate owners were beginning to arrive on the scene, and there was an explosion in federal money accessible to member schools that brought daunting challenges to the NHSC. During the 1960s and 1970s, there were 3 executive directors: Dr. M. Robert Allen, Dr. David A. Lockmiller, and William A. Fowler. During this time, the Council moved its headquarters to the current location at the Imperial House on 18th Street in Washington, D.C. During this time, the country faced wars and problems with the economy. John Kennedy was elected president. Camelot came and went in 1,000 days. The Vietnam War began in 1965, and the Beatles stormed the nation. The Vietnam-era GI Bill saw more than 1.2 million veterans, approximately 20% of all Vietnam-era veterans, elect to use their education benefits at NHSC member schools. The NHSC not only provided the family members of every POW and MIA family with a full scholarship to the NHSC program of their choosing, it was also able to have correspondence courses delivered to the POWs being held in captivity in North Vietnam. Later, the American POWs reported how these courses were the only print materials they had seen in years. They were passed from prisoner to prisoner until the pages fell apart from heavy use. During this same time, the Commission expanded so that now the public members outnumbered the school members, thus ensuring unbiased hearings and decisions by the Commission. During the 1970s, the National Home Study Council would experience additional challenges and opportunities. The decade of the 1970s started slowly but rapidly accelerated. The cost of gas in 1970 was only 36 cents, but 8 years later had increased to 78 cents per gallon after the oil embargo of 1973. In 1970, the average annual income was $9,400. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended the year at 838, and in 1974, a series of recordings led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. In 1973, the National Commission on Accrediting formally acknowledged the NHSC, making it the first time the National Commission on Accrediting had recognized an agency that accredited proprietary schools. The Council on Post-Secondary Accreditation, COPA, was founded in 1975, and the NHSC was a charter member. COPA was a coalition of recognized accrediting agencies, and COPA's recognition marked the entry of the NHSC into the inner circles of higher education. A trend that started in the mid-1960s, where member schools were acquired by major corporations, hit its stride in the 1970s. Well-known firms such as Macmillan Incorporated, McGraw-Hill, Bell & Howell, Mobil, TWA, and Ryder all acquired NHSC member schools and began to build them up, or started schools of their own. The current executive director, Michael P. Lambert, joined the staff as assistant director in 1972, and Miss Sally Welch, who serves as the associate director, joined the DETC staff in 1974. But things were to change in correspondence education over the next decade, and some say this was not for the best. In 1976, Congress changed the law regarding student loans, and correspondence schools were immediately and drastically impacted. The influx of millions of dollars in federal student aid led to an excessive growth in some institutions, while still others went out of business. William A. Rogers, the founder of the International Accountants Society, once said, "I have been in the business for over 40 years, and I know one thing. We in the school field are our own worst enemy." The next 2 decades would prove him correct. The 80s were to bring considerable controversy to the NHSC. New schools entered the council in order to be able to access federal student aid. Beginning in 1969, correspondence schools were allowed to become eligible to participate in the federal student aid programs. These grant and loan programs helped schools to grow substantially, but there were problems on the horizon. Some schools, about 1/4 of the NHSC membership, participated in student aid. This decision meant they would receive a higher level of scrutiny from the federal government. Not all schools relied solely on federal aid programs. Traditional schools, including TWA, maintained a balanced combination of federally aided and standard tuition paying students. In a short period of time, with an increase in size and profitability, several truck driver training schools grew dramatically and eventually became targets for legislative and Department of Education investigators. The NHSC confronted the issue as best it could, but the quick infusion of federal funding into a handful of institutions led to an inevitable clash of cultures. This was between the values of the traditional correspondence schools and the newcomer truck driver schools. In the run-up for the election year of 1990, some political incumbents and candidates made an issue of the growth and size of these huge schools. There was a serious concern of the looming federal student loan default coming from correspondence students. Federal hearings were held. Several of the federal aid-funded schools lost their aid eligibility and shut down. In 1992, Congress changed the rules and eliminated correspondence education from eligibility for federal Title IV aid programs. An era of retrenchment had begun. Congress had misguidedly assumed that a medium of education was too risky to entrust with federal student aid funds. The medium was not the problem at all. The problem was rather a handful of school owners who failed to control their growth and enrolled people in courses who should not have been enrolled in the first place. The 1980s and 90s saw the end of the NHSC's Old Boys Club. Women began to influence decisions at all levels of the organization. Hester Turner, formerly the national director of the Campfire Girls and head of the American Forestry Association, became a public member of the Accrediting Commission of the NHSC in 1981. She later went on to become the first woman commission chair. She is remembered as an advocate of many causes, including preserving wildlife and the environment. Serving with Miss Turner was Mrs. Josephine Ferguson, a public member of the Accrediting Commission between 1987 and 1996. She was a retired senior staff member from the U.S. Department of Education, Region 5, headquartered in Chicago. Dr. Dorothy Coyne Fenwick also served as an Accrediting Commission chair. Dr. Fenwick is one of the nation's most knowledgeable individuals on voluntary accreditation and was formerly the executive director of the Commission on Recognition of Post-Secondary Education. As a well-known author, she has written such articles as Traditional Education and Methods of Access, which addresses standardizing the evaluation of training and education as sponsored by organizations such as the Armed Forces, Business, and Industry. Dr. Fenwick has also served as chair of the Board of Trustees of the Art Institutes International. At the 67th Annual Conference held in San Antonio, Texas, Ms. Ruth Delac, president of the Boyd School, was elected the first woman president of the council in 1993. She served as a member of the DETC Board of Trustees from 1988 to 1996. As a strong leader, she was instrumental in the 1994 debate on changing the name of the NHSC to the Distance Education and Training Council. She also served as vice president at the Pittsburgh Technical Institute, an associate member of the Greater Pittsburgh Hotel Association, and as an officer on the Pittsburgh Airport Corridor Transportation Association. Michael P. Lambert was appointed executive director in 1992, replacing the retiring William A. Fowler, who had served on the staff since 1961, a period of 31 years. In 1994, in order to update the image of the council, the name of the organization was changed to the Distance Education and Training Council. It was, in hindsight, the one decision that put the council on track for preeminence in distance learning accreditation. The military schools remained DETC members, and the Marine Corps Institute recognized its 3 millionth graduate in 1995, and in 1997, the DETC introduced its new honor society called Delta Epsilon Tau International Honor Society for Distance Learning. The decade of the 90s would find the Council working with members of Congress to restore federal Title IV eligibility, and the Council membership was growing once again. Strong advancements were made by the Council, and the Commission enhanced its role of safeguarding distance education from unethical schools. It withdrew accreditation from several of the schools involved with the federal aid investigations, while other schools quickly gave up accreditation when put on notice of a review. The decade showed that self-regulation of distance education schools continued to work. In every case, it was the loss of DETC accreditation rather than federal action which corrected the problem. But facing DETC members and all of the education community was the impact of computers and the internet on education. This advancement in technology would revolutionize distance learning and lead to many changes in the delivery of all education. The NHSC and DETC accredited schools have always been at the forefront of technology, from the use by ICS of Mr. Edison's phonograph machine in the 1890s and the National Radio Institute's radio machine in 1914 to the very first build-it-yourself NRI schools computer and TV kits. Schools adopted and adapted to new technology, often long before others in education. During the 70s, as part of the correspondence school curriculum, the first computer kits and courses were being offered by NHSC member schools. Correspondence courses were taught on the new personal computer, the IBM computer of 1980. Today, the U.S. military member schools teach via the internet and satellite to the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world. Coursework was tailored by the schools using the available technology of the time. Where the technology was not readily available, schools created kits of their own to help students learn. There were kits for building microcomputers, robots, small engines, and even color TVs, all from one's home basement. The post-World War II years saw experimentation with audio recordings, film strip projection, video discs, and telephone instruction. Tests could be taken over the phone, and the first pre-internet course using phones and PCs, GeoNet, was launched by the Gemological Institute of America in 1986. Today, DETC member schools have well-developed websites that inform prospective students and teach enrolled students at a distance. Coupled with industry-standard textbooks and materials, these websites allow two-way communication in real time, study group projects, and online research. DETC schools recognized early on the value of a presence on the internet and the many uses that could benefit students. This early acceptance of technology continues to be a hallmark of DETC schools. The move toward the internet and online learning was viewed by many schools as a way to distinguish themselves in distance learning. Today, DETC schools offer entire career and degree programs via the internet, and two-way communications via email, chat rooms, and other techniques continue to connect students to their schools. As technology continues to change, DETC member schools will continue in advancing the delivery of superior education and training materials, enabling students to access their education from anywhere, anytime. The first decade of this new century has presented a variety of new and exciting choices. Online education has become incredibly popular, and over 85% of the nation's post-secondary schools now offer online programs. In 2002, publicly traded universities derived only 12% of their revenue from online enrollments. Today, these same schools receive over 60% of their revenue from online classes. With an increasing number of new schools offering the same programs online, using similar marketing efforts to attract students, DETC member schools must strive to set high standards in order to distinguish themselves and stand out. With the downturn in the economy, one of the key drivers to the growth of online enrollments in higher education is federal student aid. Currently, non-DETC schools receive 90% of their revenues from federal aid programs. Federal financial aid is also available to students at some DETC member schools. This funding source has advantages and disadvantages. The lessons of the 70s and 80s are a reminder that while federal student aid can provide students with an alternative funding source, it must be used responsibly and with caution. Another challenge of the new century is the ever-changing use of communications technology. As schools incorporate the use of new technologies to facilitate the delivery of education, they will need to be careful to balance the use of technology with the desired end result for the student. As technology is used and incorporated into a school's infrastructure, the cost and benefit to the school and to the student must be continuously evaluated. Schools must ensure that students are safeguarded in this technological revolution and that students with limited access to technology are not disadvantaged or left behind. The most important priority must continue to be the best interests of the student. For 60 of the past 85 years, the members of the Council, together with their counterparts at the independent study departments at several traditional universities, were the primary providers of distance education. Over the past 25 years, the popularity of distance learning has grown, and today, nearly every college and university offers some or all of a degree program online. DETC member schools and other institutions will ensure continued change, but as the new century unfolds, it remains to be seen where such changes will lead. So what is the future of distance learning and online education, and will technology change as much as it has in the past century? We can safely assume that technology will continue to evolve even more rapidly than in the past, and that the methods used for the delivery of education will continue to develop. In this modern age, the concept of time and distance is changing constantly, and the use of technology is part of every aspect of modern life. The use of laptops and other mobile devices is enabling students to take their classes with them wherever they go, and we will continue to see a departure from traditional classrooms as the need for convenient, effective ways to study increases. Brick-and-mortar schools will become less necessary, as will time-based education. The speed at which the student learns will be the deciding factor in the future, and lockstep courses and programs will begin to disappear. In the future, education will most likely have more regulation and higher standards that must be met by learning institutions. The DETC Commission will continue to look for new protections for students as they embrace distance education. The future cannot be predicted with certainty, but it can be prepared for. The Council, along with the Commission, working with the school members and their leaders, can ensure a bright future. The Commission will work to ensure that DETC members will always adhere to the best business practices and that students, wherever they reside, receive the most up-to-date training with top-quality educational products and materials and will be taught by superior teachers. So long as the Council of Institutions remembers that their primary purpose is to serve their students and help them achieve their own learning goals, then DETC member schools will continue to thrive. By continuing to innovate while maintaining the highest possible ethical standards, the schools and their learners will flourish. These were the reasons why the National Home Study Council was formed in 1926, and why the Distance Education and Training Council continues these objectives today. DETC member schools are truly the American way to learn and offer the best value in education and training today.
We hope you'd enjoy this trip down memory lane and look back at our rich and colorful history. We would not be here today were it not for the efforts and the vision and the hard work of hundreds of men and women who had the foresight and the vision to get us to this day. We'd also like to thank Dr. Phil Rokicki and his wife Nancy for the 3 years they devoted to creating this history. We'd also like to thank California Southern University for its efforts in making this production possible. Thank you for all that we have been able to bring America, and we look forward to an exciting future.